we're doing something different in this video. Instead of a usual sit down, I thought it would be fun and interesting to bring you along for a full week of reading where I'm not just showing my reading habits, but specifically talking about my experiences, my impressions, my thoughts on the works that I'm reading in real time. And specifically this week, I want to do something different where instead of reading some giant chonker doorstopper novel in the morning and then shorter works in the day, that's usually how I like to tandem read 2 books at a time. I'm going to do a bit of eclectic reading this week where I want to pick out some of the collections I recently bought that you might have seen in recent book hauls and read a bunch of different short stories, some essays from different writers this week. And I still am reading some giant book in the morning, which I'll get to in a moment. But that's the plan. Bring you along this week. It's not quite a vlog. I don't have the audacity to presume that you care that much about my personal life, but you will see more of my dogs right here. And I think while I brew up some coffee before I do my reading today, that I will discuss this book right here, which is The House of Government by Yuri Slezkine. I took off the jacket on it, so it's just nice regular hardcover format right here. But really been enjoying this so far. I'll talk about it more in a moment. But that reminds me, when it comes to my reading schedule, I typically read 3 different times in the day. I read really early in the morning. I get up around 3:50 a.m. every morning. I do that for a few reasons, but primarily because it's very quiet, it's peaceful. I haven't been stimulated by work and emails and social media and all of that yet, so I really like to read in the morning. And then I will read midday, which I'm about to do now. I'll take a break. Fortunately, I work for myself and I work from home, so I can kind of control my schedule in that way. So I'll take a break for about 40 to 60 minutes in the middle of the day, read, and then later in the evening after dinner, my wife and I will usually read for about an hour as well. So about to have that midday break, so I'm gonna brew up some coffee and chat about The House of Government. So House of Government is my current massive book that I'm working through. It'll probably take me a month and a half to finish. And it's interesting for a few reasons. First of which, it's my first foray into history as a genre. Haven't read any history before, and I've really been meaning to, along with the genre of biographies, essays, and really expanding beyond that as well. I've really only read a lot of literary fiction, sci-fi, and of course philosophy, but history is something I haven't dabbled into yet. And I got this recommended to me from Ruben over at To Readers It May Concern. And also Steve Donahue, I believe, has reviewed this, and he might have a blurb on the paperback, but I might just be making stuff up there. But phenomenal work so far, about 140 pages in, really enjoying it. I was worried, honestly, that history might be boring to read. Not overall in a totality way, but certain sections I thought might get overly pedantic or specific, and I might just get bored. But so far, that hasn't happened. And the reason that I wanted to start reading this book specifically instead of waiting till next year, well, let me grind these real quick. So the reason I wanted to read this book a little bit sooner than I first planned to is because if you watch my last book haul, I bought a ton of Soviet works. Gorky, Ilya Ilf, and Yevgeny Petrov, Isaac Babel's, Red Cavalry, all these different Soviet works that pertain not only to Soviet life, but specifically those early days of the revolution. And this book specifically, if I haven't mentioned it already, covers the Russian Revolution decades before the kind of prime October Revolution with Lenin, Trotsky, all of that, but also the decades following with Stalin and so forth. Is covered in this book, and I've really enjoyed it so far. I haven't read enough to give a synopsis or much of a summation on it, but so far I'm in a section that is exploring what's leading up to the revolution, specifically the kind of 2 driving forces that create this socialist party that ends up taking over control from the Romanovs. And those forces are the peasantry and then the working class, or the proletariat. And Slezkine's he's approaching it in a very interesting way that I haven't always thought of it, is approaching Marxism as religious fanaticism and comparing how these different Abrahamic religions or these different doomsday cults or these different charismatic figures were able to build up a lot of fervor and kind of seize the zeitgeist of the time and lead to change or build up a big audience through their views and through this kind of idea of the Last Judgment. So anyway, all that to say, he's examining how the peasantry and the workforce right now both share sentiment and sympathy for this socialist cause and Marxism, but they have very different experiences as far as like the students and the working force versus like the peasantry and all of that. So anyway, it's been a delightful read so far. I'm really looking forward to reading more of it, and that's what I've been reading in the morning for about an hour each morning, is The House of Government. And then I just started last night reading some of Jorge Borges, which I don't know, saying the name like that sounds funny to me because the rhyme, I guess, Jorge Luis Borges. But I started reading his short stories last night and yesterday around midday as well. And it was nothing like I expected, which it was probably my mistake. I didn't expect him to be as philosophically intense as his work is so far. I've only read 2 short stories and I'm working on the 3rd. But in other words, I'd say his works require a lot more mental horsepower and attention than, I guess, the style of fiction I was expecting before. I was expecting like a simple, not simple per se, but a relatively straightforward story being told. And his works are much more an investigation of language, of reality, of idealism. They're very metaphysical in that sense. So it's much more a blending between fiction and almost philosophical treatise, as I would say. It's my experience with Borges so far. But it's only been 2.5 short stories of the massive collection I have. So I'm going to finish brewing this. Most of it's for me, some of it's for my wife, and then we'll finish reading some more Borges, and I'll recap after that. So I want to say this while it's fresh in my mind, but Borges is clearly very fascinated by the concept and potentially the consequences of the eternal or the infinite or the immortal. I've only read, this is my 3rd short story, but with that in mind, all of the short stories I've read so far have this reoccurring theme around immortality or infinity and how that relates to or is consequential to subjectivity and the individual. But I want to read real quick some of these quotes for any of you that have not read Borges. This first one kind of stands on its own. He says, quote, "We accept reality so readily, perhaps because we sense that nothing is real." And then on the other side of the page, he says, quote, "Jews, Christians, and Muslims all profess belief in immortality, but the veneration paid to the first century of life is proof that they believe only in those 100 years, for they destine all the rest throughout eternity to rewarding or punishing what one did when alive." So again, a lot of focus on this concept of immortality and the consequences associated. But let me finish this story, and I'm going to read one more, and then I'll recap with you. Borges makes me feel dumb. Not in like an insulting way, but because there's so much to his writing. It's very lean. Like there's not much fat on these stories. Some of them are longer. Some of them, one I just read called "The Two Kings into Labyrinths," that's like 2 pages, if that. It's really just like 2 paragraphs almost. I don't know if I'd say he's epigrammatic, but his work is concise, it's lean, and it has a lot of depth to it, for lack of a better term. But very interesting stories. I will read a few more later tonight, and that'll be basically probably close to 10 stories I've read of him, 2 days of reading him, and then I'm going to move on to another collected works. But so far, that story, The City of the Immortal, stuck out to me, and I did want to mention that first story I read, Tolon Ukbar, something Temeritus. That story is very interesting for a few reasons, because it speaks about the narrator is researching this fictional nation where the language of these tribal people doesn't contain any nouns. They don't perceive the world in spatial terms, really only temporal and as a linkage in successive events, which is very interesting because this is something that a lot of philosophers, specifically like Nietzsche, I was listening to a lecture earlier this week about how Nietzsche thought that human beings and our consciousness created nouns as being central to language because we weren't able to kind of conceptualize our experiences or our phenomenology without having a like subjective view of the world. And clearly subjectivism as far as what is reality is central to Borges' work. So anyway, before I ramble too long, I'm gonna leave it there for the day, get some work done, and I'll probably catch up with you guys later this evening and give you my final thoughts on Borges. All right, so a little break from Borges. I just got this package in the mail and I realized while opening it, I should probably show it on camera, but one of you emailed me about a week ago wanting to send me some books. And I am always happy to oblige that. So if any of you want to send me books that you would love for me to read, as long as you can kind of confirm that you are not a serial killer, I'm happy to oblige and take the books off your hands. But before I get to what I think is a really cool edition or copy, I want to show you real quick what this person sent. I'll keep it anonymous for privacy purposes, but sent me a nice little note and gave me 2 copies of Don Quixote, which I believe this copy, which is what translated by Edith Grossman, I believe this is the edition that's the best translation from what I've heard. And he also added in a mass market paperback copy of Don Quixote as well, so that's nice. And I think he had saw that I had bought Faulkner and was trying to get into William Faulkner, so he sent over a copy of The Sound and Fury, The Sound and the Fury, and then Absalom, Absalom. I've heard Absalom, Absalom is a very confusing or complex work. Also added in a copy of what is called The Wings of the Dove by Henry James. I know nothing about Henry James and especially nothing about this specific book, but I see there are some tabs from when he had read it, so I'll definitely have to check that out. I'm trying to figure out what we got here. So this little box is some CDs, which gosh, I haven't seen these since I was a lot younger, but some CDs of, I believe, a Russian composer, Dmitri Shostakovich. Dmitri Shostakovich. But that's interesting. Obviously, me learning Russian, I'm assuming that's why he added this in there, so that's pretty neat as well. The only challenge with this is finding a CD player because my computer does not have a CD player, but I'll figure it out. Oh boy, this is really nice. This is a folio edition of The Sound and the Fury from William Faulkner. So that paperback will probably be the one I tab up, beat up, and might write in the margins. And then these are much nicer copies. So this first book is actually the work itself, and then the other book that was in the sleeve is a glossary and commentary. So thank you so much for sending these. I'm really excited to look closer at these, especially these folio editions. But all of them are really nice, and a lot of these are books I've been meaning to pick up at some point soon anyway. So now I have the pressure on me to read more Faulkner sooner rather than later, and a beautiful edition to dig through as well. So thank you again so much. I felt like I should share this on the camera, and now I guess back to the week of reading. All right, so I just finished up the last short story I plan to read this week from Jorge Luis Borges, and I wanted to get my impressions on him as a writer because this is my first time reading him, and as much as I can't give an overarching opinion on him because I've only read 6 short stories, I really like him. I feel like he's going to be a writer that I return to, that I find myself grabbing this collection off the shelf more frequently over the next few weeks or months, just because his works seem to demand my attention. They almost beckon me to reread them, to think about the concepts away from the text. He brings up these very philosophical questions, these very metaphysical concepts of infinity and labyrinths and time and spatiality and temporality. All that to say, strange works, not totally what I expected, and definitely can be quite perplexing and frustrating at times to read, but they also seem like they will be well worth the investment to reread them and rework them. So that's it for Borges. And before I end this clip, I think tomorrow I'm going to read a short story from Alexander Pushkin. And I have this nice collection, this Everyman's edition, and what I wanted to read this week is The Captain's Daughter. I think that's one of his most popular short stories, and he is, I think it's fair to say, Russia's greatest poet. At least, one of their greatest literary figures. And I haven't read him yet. He's like the last giant name I haven't read yet. I have Yevgeny Onegin on the shelf, so I'm going to read that novel soon. But as far as his poems, the short stories, I need to start somewhere. So tomorrow morning, or tomorrow I should say, in the morning I'll read the House of Government. But tomorrow we're going to read The Captain's Daughter, and I'll have to share my thoughts then. Alright, it is about 5:30 a.m. and I just finished up my reading for the morning, and they have seized control following the February Revolution, heading over to Petrograd, or modern-day St. Petersburg, seized control with the October Revolution, and are now in the process of doing away with all the old regimes, killing off the Romanovs, dissolving all the previous governing bodies and systems in place, and they're struggling in the process to coerce the masses to be all committed to this prophecy that Marxism and communism, that the Bolsheviks are bolstering and putting forward, trying to coerce the masses to work together towards this idyllic vision for the future. But one thing I want to note about this book is that it is paced very well, so I don't feel like any one point is lingered on in exhaustion. And the author also does a great job of kind of working forwards and backwards in time. So you might get introduced to certain figures or moments, and then you feel like they're maybe underappreciated, but then he comes back to them with a little bit more detail later. And the other phenomenal part about this book is that it is incredibly dependent or derivative from archives, memoirs, letters, autobiographies, all of that. Almost every page has, probably like 30% of every page is literal quotes from people's memoirs, or their literal words. So it makes it feel extra real, extra visceral. And the revolutionary times are hard to picture, and the images we can find online are helpful, but the written descriptions really add a bit more of a vivid feeling and depiction in your mind. So really enjoyed the 20 or so pages I read this morning, and later we'll read some more Russian of Pushkin's The Captain's Daughter. Alright, flashy B-roll aside, I'm about to read The Captain's Daughter from Alexander Pushkin. Got his nice little mugshot here in this Everyman's Library edition. So, gonna read this, drink some damn good coffee, and I'll give a little recap after. Alright, so I just finished up reading about 30 pages, and I foolishly didn't realize how long this short story is. It's almost a novella length. It's about 120 or so pages, so it will take me all of today and probably all of tomorrow to finish, but no problem. I'm really enjoying it so far, and not much has happened. We've been introduced to the son, the narrator, who is the son of this military man and this wealthy landowner. He's sending off his son to the military to kind of pay his dues, earn honor and duty, and so forth. And instead of being sent to St. Petersburg to join the guards, he's sent to Orenburg. This seems like this more smaller village and station that the military stationed at. And on their trip to get to this fort, the son makes a number of naive or foolish mistakes where he's not listening to the servant that had been sent along with him. He's kind of just trying to prove himself, basically, as a young man does. And by doing so, he fumbles some money playing billiards. He ends up giving away a hareskin coat to this mujik or peasant out there when they get caught in a snowstorm due to, again, his own foolishness. And now we've met this captain's family at the fort that he's going to be at, and we've set eyes on Masha, the captain's daughter, hence the name of the story. So gonna finish reading this later this evening and probably tomorrow, and then I'll give you a bit of a recap on my experience thus far. But so far, enjoying Pushkin. I like his prose and his narrative tone, I'd say.
Look at it, it's shining on your face.
Oh, it is?
Kinda, it's just really bright. Get out of my face.
Alright, so it's been about a day and a half since I gave my last update on the captain's daughter, and I just finished the story, and I generally enjoyed it, but the plot, reflecting on it, I don't think was too extravagant, but I think what carried it was the lively characters that had these kind of sharp witticisms or rejoinders or just this charisma to them that made them quite distinct, especially like the narrator. And then, because the plot itself was kind of a little bit predictable, and it felt like the ending was wrapped up fairly quickly. So to explain the summary and the plot a little bit, to build off what I already mentioned, you're following this young soldier, Pyotr, and he gets to this fort, and the fort is quickly taken over and besieged by this fugitive that was actually the peasant he met earlier on when he got stuck in the snowstorm. And because he had these nice gestures to the peasant, bought him the vodka, gave him his hareskin coat, he's pardoned by Pugachev, who is the fugitive, and he spends the rest of the story, for the most part, leveraging this goodwill he's built up with Pugachev to rescue the captain's daughter, this beloved of his, this fiance. And I think a lot of the story is about how his servant was kind of condemning these good gestures and these acts that he was doing to these random strangers who ended up having some control over his life later in the story. So there's something to be said there, maybe some kind of moral claim or suggestion that Pushkin's trying to put into the story. But overall, enjoyed it. Like I said, more for the writing than, I guess, the plot that was actually contained within the story, if that makes sense. But I think that's it for Pushkin for now. I will come back to his short stories in the future, but now I'm going to move on to the essays from Susan Sontag. Out of the Russian books I've read, or authors, which would you be most inclined to read? If you had to choose.
I don't know, list a few.
Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Pushkin.
Name some titles.
Anna Karenina, Master and Margarita, and
That
Quiet
one.
Place Not Master and Margarita.
Because you loved it so much.
Yeah, I think that one would be more up your alley.
Yeah. How long is it?
It's only like 340 pages. You get to it.
Maybe.
Alright, so a little bit of time has elapsed since the last clip, and yesterday I didn't film, but I did read 2 essays from this collection from Susan Sontag. The first one was on Paul Goodman. It is the essay that kicks off this collection. And I've never heard of Paul Goodman. Supposedly he is an essayist, I believe, from the mid-1900s was really when he was thriving and making a name for himself, around the 60s, before passing away, I think, in 72. But I haven't heard of him, and neither have I heard of, what was his name? Norman Mailer. I haven't heard of Norman Mailer either, but apparently he was another quite famous American writer of the time, a brilliant writer of his generation, as Sontag says. And then lo and behold, this morning I was looking at different posts on Bookstagram, and I saw someone mention Norman Mailer, so I was like, oh. But I mean, that's sometimes the beauty of reading different books, or whether it's fiction or nonfiction, is you get recommended different authors or books or resources that are mentioned in the books themselves. So anyway, that was the Paul Goodwin one. It was all right. And then I read the one Fascinating Fascism, which is about the German filmmaker. I'll give this pronunciation my best shot, Leni Riefenstahl. But she was a German filmmaker and friend of Adolf Hitler at the time of the Nazi regime. And she was trying to have a bit of this resurgence with an art exhibit in this photograph collection in the 70s. Susan Sontag kind of just tore her to pieces in this essay, and the idea of fascist art. So it was interesting. I didn't love it. It wasn't, it felt excessively long for the point that she was trying to make. But that being said, there's a few other essays in here, and I think I'm going to read the essay that this collection's titled up after, Under the Sign of Saturn. So I'll read that collection, and I plan on reading the rest of this today and tomorrow. Today's Saturday, read the rest Sunday. So finish this collection, and that'll probably wrap up this video. But anyway, got the collection, got a nice cup of coffee, got my reading buddies with me, and we're about to read. All right, I just finished up the essay Under the Sign of Saturn, and that one I liked a lot more than the other two I had read. So I'm interested to see what I think of the other 4 essays from Sontag in this collection. So far, to me, her writing is very candid yet eloquent. She's very precise with her vocabulary and the structure of her sentences, and yet she is also very compassionate in her tone and very candid, as I said. It's a very familiar tone, kind of like a friend speaking to you or explaining whatever topic it is to you. So I do like that about her writing so far. Hard to make an assessment of a writer off 3 essays, none of those being, I think, her most prominent essays. But this essay, Under the Sign of Saturn, to kind of summarize it, was an exploration of the melancholic soul or temperament. What Sontag tries to explore or explain using the life of Walter Benjamin as this kind of fixated point where she's has his life and his work under this microscope and looking at that and looking at him over the years, and also other melancholic authors like Kafka she references multiple times, is the idea that for those with a melancholic temperament like Walter Benjamin, like a Kafka, the present moment is quite restrictive and suffocating for them because they can't dissect it and interpret it and analyze it through a critical lens in the same way that they can the past or history that has already happened, that is in a bit more of a fixed state. So anyway, I don't think my initial impression and read is the greatest summary of it, so forgive me for that, but I do want to quickly read 2 sections that stood out to me from this essay. Quote, Benjamin's recurrent themes are characteristically means of spatializing the world. For example, his notion of ideas and experiences as ruins. To understand something is to understand its typography, to know how to chart it, and to know how to get lost. For the character born under the sign of Saturn, time is the medium of constraint, inadequacy, repetition, and mere fulfillment. In time, one is only what one is, what one has always been. In space, one can be another. And then later on, she says, only because the past is dead is one able to read it. Only because history is fetishized and physical objects can one understand it. Only because the book is a world can one enter it. The book for him was another space in which to stroll. So overall, I'm not wowed by Sontag yet, but I suspect I will be in due time. She's growing on me, so I'm going to read another essay or 2 later today, and then I'll round up and give my thoughts on this week as a whole. All right, I'm here to give my final thoughts on this essay collection from Susan Sontag, as well as wrap up this week of reading. And if I'm being completely honest, I have not been wowed by this essay collection. I think that's more a reflection on this collection than it is on Sontag, because none of her more popular essays, more well-known essays, are in this collection. And most of these are a bit of reflection or commentary upon someone who's recently passed away or a very specific narrowed topic or focus, such as the death of Paul Goodman or the death of Roland Barthes. She talks about that, or she's narrowing in on the German filmmaker. And I don't think polemics are quite where she really shines either. And then even in the essay where she's exploring, like the supreme form of art with, what's his name, like Seinberg's German film, I just wasn't wowed in these. And I think it's because the topics that these essays cover, they don't give her the freedom to really enact her creative expression and perspectives on cultural matters that she's primarily known for, as far as I understand. So I'm not denouncing Sontag. I'm actually eager to read her, because I think a lot of times when we jump into the field of reading a new author for the first time, as I've done throughout this week, we often gravitate towards the most popular works, the ones that are most glamorous, or their magnum opus. If I'm going to read Tolstoy, I read War and Peace, I read Anna Karenina. I don't lunge at Resurrection first, or lunge at his lesser known short stories. But I think by doing that, you can work your way up towards having this admiration and love for an author, and kind of have that carrot at the end of the stick, or that dessert waiting at the end of their magnum opus, or their the apotheosis of their career. So with that said, that's like my final thoughts on Sontag. And overall, this week has been very strange for me, because as I mentioned before, I usually will read 2 books at a time. I'm usually not jumping around with short stories, and I'm not normally reading this many new authors back to back to back. But it's been a fun experimental week for me to kind of hop around, and there's 2 takeaways. One is that reading a new author for the first time is so fun. It feels like you're tasting a new food for the first time, and you're slowly getting acquainted with this very unfamiliar but distinct flavor. And sometimes when you bite into it, it's sharp, and you're not fully comfortable with it yet. You're a little standoffish with it. And over time, you start to appreciate the flavor. The first time you have a star fruit, you're like, this is nothing like a strawberry or blueberry I've had before, but you start to familiarize with the style of writing, the tone, the turns of phrases, and you never know if that's going to become your favorite fruit. And at the same time, there are certain authors that are very much an acquired taste. Borges at first, and I think for a lot of people, it might not be their jam. It's too much, it's too philosophical, it's very perplexing and cerebral. And it might be an acquired taste. Susan Sontag might be an acquired taste that isn't for me down the line, but we'll have to see. But there's so much fun reading new authors, and because I am still so new to the world of literature, have not even really graced the surface of history or biography of so many genres, the world is my oyster, and I can't wait to taste all these different flavors. So that, and then the other point is, maybe this pertains to the idea of vanity, is if I don't finish this, or if I only read a few short stories from Borges, I can't mark that off as complete in Goodreads. I can't really mark it off as a book read in my mind. And it doesn't really disturb me, because I know in reality that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I check it off as complete, or if I put it on my shelf knowing I have another 1 or 2 essays in here to read. But I don't know, it's something that you think about, to feel like you have stuff you've only nitpicked at. It's like leaving leftovers in your fridge, and you feel like I either need to finish them or get rid of them at some point, which isn't true with books, of course. But I don't know, it's been something I've reflected on this week, of how to feel or associate with collections, short stories that I haven't yet finished, and that I may not even pick up again for another year, or at least months. So I don't know. I wonder how you all interpret reading books like that. And I think as I mature as a reader, I will be more of a nitpicker, and I'm starting to see why people do that. But that'll be it for this video. I appreciate you all watching, and let me know if this is a style of video you'd like to see more of. It's a bit out of my comfort zone, but it's also been quite fun, and I think offered me a chance to speak about these books in a less structured and dialed in way, but a more creative way. So let me know in the comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you all in the next one.